Record now, Matt.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marcus. So that's good. A lot of you have had some experience writing. So I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 basic ways to write, just as a starting point. And even at my age, at 53, I still use these 4 methods to write music. And by developing all of them early, you're all, relatively young, you can get really great at writing music by the time you're Marcus or my age, for sure, like without a doubt, and you may already be good at it. So the basic 4 ideas that I keep circling back to and getting better at are these. So the first one is to write over 1 chord. So I always start when I'm teaching composition or writing myself is just starting with a harmony at first. And so in this case, if we look at like a C major 7, for instance, 1, 3, 5, major 7. If we were to write a melody over that, that would be an example of writing a melody over 1 chord. And the way we might go about that, so I'm going to change the sound here so it sustains, is to hold the chord and then practice singing things over it. Singing is a great way to connect with your mind's voice and with kind of what you actually hear, and then writing that material down. So if I do this, I'll turn it down so you can hear my voice a little more. So if I were to write that out, you can sit at the piano and as you're singing it, figure out what the notes are, write it down. You don't have to start with a rhythm. You can just write the notes down in order that you're hearing. And so that's my first suggestion, is to write over 1 chord. And what you should do is pick the chord that you're the most comfortable improvising on first. So if you've played in a high school jazz band for a while and you've played over some blues, maybe like a B flat blues, write something over B flat 7, like this sound. So the idea is that you're singing melodies over a dominant chord. It can be very simple. And so then I'd write down C, G, B flat, A flat as my melody for B flat 7. Okay, so that's the first step, is just like writing melodies over 1 chord. And if you practice doing that every day or once a week or even once a month, in a long time, like after a year, you'll have a lot of skill. You'll be able to write a lot of different types of melodies over a lot of different types of chords. So that's the first skill I would encourage everyone to practice, writing over 1 chord, starting on a chord you already know. So the second step is to do the same process using several chords. So one example would be like if we took the first 4 bars of All the Things You Are. We've got F minor. You could look at your I real B for this progression. F minor to B flat minor to E flat 7 to A flat major. And then if we just loop that, B flat again, B flat minor, sorry, F minor, B flat minor to E flat 7 to A flat major. And just looping that progression and practicing writing over a progression that you're familiar with. It can be 2 chords, just back and forth between 2 chords. It could be 3, 4, or it could be an entire song of chords, maybe starting with a standard that you like to play on. Say you like blue bossa. So you take the chords to blue bossa and you practice writing a new song over those chords. And so this would be the second step, is writing over a progression that's more than 1 chord. And basically by practicing the first thing, which is writing melodies over 1 chord, you just do the same thing in slowed down time. You hold each chord, you sing a little bit, you write down some ideas, and then you practice stringing those ideas together over the chord progression. A couple rules that I like to work from is to try to start by using 2 notes per chord. So for instance, if I was doing the first four bars to All the Things You Are, starting F minor, just picking two notes. Sorry, 5-1. That would be two notes, right? So then I have. So the idea being that starting with just two notes for one chord, and then eventually allowing yourself a little more freedom when you start to hear more of a melodic idea. So you can do that through a variety of ways, just picking notes randomly. You can use the singing method, which I showed you. If you take F minor and you just try different two-note cells, like maybe the 9, which is a pretty note. That would be 9 to 13. So just having two notes, sometimes if you create melodies using upper structure like 9, 11, and 13, you can get some really pretty and ornate sounding melodies. Or you can stay more in the structure like the 3rd and the 5th. So that would be the second stage, is basically writing over several chords. So the third is to write from melody. So this is when it becomes a little more advanced. And so the skill sets you learn in the first two steps are going to be really important for writing melody first. So when you start writing melody first, I always recommend starting with a major scale. So if I take like a C major scale, right, and I use those 7 notes to write with, I might come up with something like there's a melody. So that would be 5, 3, 7, 9, 1, 7, 6. So at first you don't necessarily need to have a rhythm to it. So if I say that the first 3 notes are going to be one chord, then the way I harmonize it once I have the melody written out is by trying the different roots from the C major scale first. So I might start with C, and then B, and then A, and then G. That sounds nice. F, E, D, and back to C. So say I take F. If F is in the bass and it's a C major scale, it might be like an F major 7, because all those notes are from C major. That could work. Or it could be E minor 7. Again, I'm just creating chords that come from the scale that the melody came from. In this case, C major. Or D minor, C major, B half diminished, A minor. So there's my melody. So the cool thing about having a melody that's all from one major scale is that all those 7 chords from the major scale will work when you harmonize this melody. So if I put it all over F major, the 4 chord in C major, or E minor, or D minor, C major, B half, A minor, G7. So all those chords work. There are other chords then outside of the key of C major that might also work, and you can try those simply by adding the root like we did just now. So if I add A flat outside of the key play the same melody. You can see it sounds fairly dissonant, and maybe it would work for part of the melody, but not all of the melody. Like if I made that a E diminished, and then to A minor, that could work. Or we could go to F sharp, also outside of the key. So if I start on F, this could be a D over F sharp. I could start on F major. So trying to figure out how to use some of the bass notes in a different key that are not in the C major scale. E flat would be another example. Again, not really melodic for this first part. If I started on E minor and then went to B7 with a third in the bass, like a B7 altered, could work. Could also be a C minor major. So basically what I'm using here is deductive reasoning. So this will be where theory comes in super handy. If you've learned chord scale theory, then you can use deductive reasoning to say, well, the melody has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes, or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 notes. And so if I put another note in the bass, using reasoning, I can figure out what that chord might be, or what chord scale it comes from, and then what 7 possible chords it could represent. So that's where theory is going to come in really handy. It's going to help you flush out your ear and think about the sounds you're hearing. So another outside sound would be that C sharp. So that first part could be like a C sharp half diminish. And then I can go to F sharp. And then to B minor. Not great, but again, you're just exploring and trying to find some good possibilities to harmonize your melody. So just to reiterate, once again, you write a melody from a note set, in this case, a major scale. I always start with a major scale when I'm teaching this concept. And oftentimes I write starting with the major scales just for my own writing. And then secondly is harmonizing with the different chords from that major scale. It's a very simple method, and you can come up with a ton of great songs using just the harmony from a major scale. A lot of rock music does this, and pop music, and of course a lot of jazz has sections of tunes that are all diatonic to one key. Okay, so the fourth thing I'm going to talk about is writing from rhythm. So I think writing from rhythm is the most challenging because it assumes that you can already write from harmony and can write melody. So an example would be taking a rhythm, and I like to start with rhythm I already know. So you take a song you know, say in this case I was thinking of the very end of Sunny Moon for 2. So it's so if I take that melody, rest, so that rhythm, writing using that rhythm. So again, you can start by narrowing your note choice to one major scale, and then you can take this, let's say C major scale, and try to write into that rhythm. Let's see. We could even use the melody. So that would be kind of taking the first melody that I wrote and changing the rhythm to match the last phrase of Sunny Moon for 2. And then again, putting that in over a harmony, maybe F major. Going to D minor. So that would be writing from rhythm. So you're starting with a rhythmic idea, and then you're just playing that rhythm with your major scale until you find a really nice group of notes that works really nice with the rhythm. You write that down, then you figure out a chord to go with it. So again, starting with a rhythm you already know, stealing a rhythm from a song you know. Rhythm can't be copywritten, So you can take any rhythm you hear, you're allowed to use it and write your own music with it. Same with chords. You can't copyright chords, so you can take any chords you hear. If you like, if there's a pop tune you really like, something from any popular song, you can just take that entire chord progression, write it down, look up the chords or transcribe the chords at the piano, and then write your own melody over it, and you've got your own song. So that's kind of the introduction to this concept. Let's see. Can we have some questions here so I can help explain further anything you have questions about? Can be anything related to anything I've covered or some other question you have that relates to composition. Do you try to compose even phrases? Good question. Or does it matter? Good question. Okay, so if you listen to pop music, for instance, if you put on top 50 on Spotify, US top 50, and you listen to it, what you're going to see is there's a lot of exactly what you're saying here, even phrases. In other words, 2-bar phrases are really common in popular music. 4-bar phrases, 2-bar phrases, and even 1-bar phrases. You know, if it's in 4, a 2-bar phrase is probably the most common phrase length for pop music. It doesn't mean there aren't odd phrases, like there might be a 2-bar phrase with a bar of 2/4 at the end sometimes, at the end of a phrase to elongate the ending a little bit. But in general, the 2-bar phrase is the most prevalent, in my opinion, in popular music. And in jazz, the 4-bar phrase is super common. I would say maybe even more than the 2-bar phrase in pop. So even phrases are very common. I do practice quite a bit writing odd phrases like 3-bar phrases, 5-bar phrases, 6 and 7-bar phrases, 9-bar phrases. The reason why is because I'm trying to also make the phrasing less predictable and a little bit more interesting, let's say, or more varied. So you can experiment with that. And starting with a deliberate attempt to make a 3-bar phrase is a good way to practice it. You just take 3 chords, for instance, in 3 bars. If I do, again, the first 3 bars of all the things. See, that's a 3-bar phrase. And if you just keep looping it, you might start coming up with a nice melody over that. And you have a good 3-bar phrase. And once you start hearing in 3-bar phrases, it gets easier, but it is more challenging at first because we're used to hearing thousands of songs that have 2 and 4-bar phrases or even phrasing. Really good question. Let's see, any other questions? Let's see. When do you know an idea is bad? Okay, great. So that's a great question. So what I would really encourage is for you all to trust yourself and try to produce good music. You know, good music on your own terms. So you decide if it's good or bad. And, you know, that's what you need to rely on, because in artists, part of the challenge of becoming an artist or a composer is you have to believe in what you're writing to give yourself time to develop the art form. It's going to take a long time. So when I listen back to the songs I wrote in high school now, you know, 40 years later, it's like, I don't think those songs are that good. But if I hadn't done that hard work early on, I wouldn't be able to write some of the more successful songs I've written now in life. And, you know, I'm not a super popular composer, but I have had people play my music all over the world, have recorded my music. And so I've had a little taste of success as a composer. And then, of course, I write all the music for all my albums. So even as a, you know, as a little guy, let's say, you can get a lot of opportunity to compose and have your music played, and people can really enjoy playing it. So it's an excellent question. You have to decide if it's good or bad, and you have to believe in it. And when you get older and you look back, you might be like, I was just starting out. It's not as good as what I write now. And then as you get older, you again look back and you're like, well, now I write better. And so you just start getting better and better at writing, and you start having a better and more personalized and sophisticated understanding of how you want your music to sound. And, you know, by being true to yourself, you will absolutely develop an audience of people who like what you're doing. They like the way you write, and they like the way you express yourself musically. So, you know, staying true to yourself is important. I would encourage you not to try necessarily to sound like someone else unless you're using that as a learning tool. So, you know, you might say, oh, I want to write a tune like Wayne Shorter, from the 50s. And so you listen to a bunch of Wayne's music from the 50s, you learn some of it, you copy some of the progressions, and you try to write a tune that's similar to a Wayne song from the 50s. And you'll learn a lot doing that. And so it's a great way to get better as a composer. And it might turn out to be original enough where you don't even feel that it's that derivative of Wayne's music. It might end up sounding very original, even though that's where you got the inspiration for it. Hope that answers your question. What else we got? Okay, how do you decide what to name your composition? This is challenging. Okay, a couple things. So you can start with a name of a tune ahead of time. So if you get inspiration for a reason to write a tune, something meaningful in your life, something meaningful in society that you think warrants you writing a tune, you can title it for that, and then you can try to write into that title. You know, you're using the title for inspiration. Usually what I do is I use mood for inspiration. So I'm in a certain mood and I write a song that matches that mood using the methods I described before, like messing around in the major scale, finding melodies I like from this particular mood I'm in. And then at the end, after I listen to the piece in its finished state, I try to think of, you know, what would be a good title for it? What does it remind me of? Who does it remind me of? Sometimes I like dedicating songs to people that are important in my life or people who've inspired me. So those are things I've done. Sometimes when I write a contrafact, when you write, say it's you're writing a song over There'll Never Be Another You, and you write your own melody over it. Sometimes I'll use like a contrafact form, and so I'll even use an anagram for the name of the tune. I'll take an anagram of the title of the tune, mix up the letters, and come up with a different name for the tune. That's sometimes a shortcut. Another thing is that titles of tunes are also not, you can't copyright the title of a tune, so you could just steal a title of a tune that you like. You know, you can call your tune whatever you want. It's just your version, you know, same title, different tune. How do you avoid cliches? Okay, this is hard. Avoiding cliches is hard because you can only know it's a cliche if you've listened to everything that's been played. You know, you have to have heard so much music before you recognize what is a cliche. A cliche is a reoccurring theme that many composers use. I mean, you could say that a first inversion triad is a cliche. However, or a second inversion, or all those you could almost think of as triadic cliches. The thing is there's only 16 ways to order a triad in closed position. So there's no way to avoid triadic cliches, for instance. So a cliche is more about understanding what's been used a ton. And so what I would say is, instead of avoiding using cliches, try using cliches in a fresh way. So, you know, if you have this, like, here's a jazz cliche you may recognize. The Cry Me a River cliche, they call it. And that's over a minor chord, C minor. So, you know, if you take that and put it in a different context, say like B altered, that would be an example of trying to recontextualize. It's a common, actually a cliche way to recontextualize it, but an idea like that, trying to recontextualize a cliche in a way that is unexpected. Kurt Rosenwinkel's a good example. A lot of his songs have small melodic cliches, but he puts them inside of a really interesting, or against a really interesting harmony. So I would say embrace the cliches if you know, a little bit in a song, and you can use that as a hook or something that people recognize. And they're like, oh, I kind of know that melody, but it sounds different the way this composer has used it. You can also go to your professors, you know, your teachers, your friends. Does this sound cliche? I've gone to a lot of friends and been like, hey, is this song already been written? Like, it sounds super familiar to me. And they will say, oh yeah, it's like this tune. And then you recognize that maybe it's too cliche. Okay, we've got another question. How many changes does a tune go through before you complete it? Okay, good question. So I'm a big fan of not really finishing tunes, just constantly changing them, updating them, rearranging them, and I keep them as long as I enjoy playing them. So some tunes I've played for years. A tune that I wrote back in the late 90s, I recorded on one of my early albums called Red. That tune Red I still play, and I've arranged it since I originally wrote it. I put like a interlude on it, and other tunes that I've written years ago, I have done big band arrangements of, with the help of Marcus and Dan Gailey. I'm trying to learn to write for big band. So sometimes old tunes I will revisit to rearrange if I really like them. So I always feel like tunes are never done. You know, it's just your last version of the tune, uh, or your most recent version of the tune. So, you know, what I find is that some tunes stand the test of time in my life. Like I come back to them and keep playing them. They're part of like tunes I like to play. Other tunes, I put them on an album and I just never look back. They weren't maybe good enough, or I've changed substantially since I wrote them. So I don't keep coming back to them. So yeah, you can always rearrange them, rewrite them, and make them better until you just abandon them because you feel like you've grown past it. Let's see, is the lick a cliche? Yeah, the lick is a cliche. It's exactly right. So that's kind of almost like a comedic cliche, right? It's almost like a musical meme. It's like transcended even past to cliche. Good question. Okay. What makes a lot of sense? Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense. When do you think you are ready to write in two parts, like a Brahms two-part invention or something like that? Okay, that's a great question. Okay, so in one sense, writing over a bass note is already two parts. So when we looked at that melody, I kind of came up with, if I put that over F, that F used to be called like a cantus firmus, the lowest part, the bass part. That's a second part, really. It's contextualizing and creating a static, you know, one note melody underneath the other melody. If I move it back and forth, that could be the melody, just two notes back and forth. So once you have a second part, any note, that is a second part. It is a counterpoint. It's, it could be very simple, like a drone, or it could be ostinato that moves, the same to something that repeats over and over. I think if you want to really study counterpoint, this is a perfect place to do it is in school. So, in college, you can't usually study counterpoint in high school unless you study privately, most likely. But in college, you can take a class on Baroque counterpoint. I took that class. It was one of the best classes I took in college for writing. And so a lot of my writing is two parts plus a bass note. So there'll be a main melody, a secondary melody, and then a bass note. And even the bass note might have a bass figure where the bass player has a written figure they're playing that is a bass melody of some sort. So a lot of my tunes are three-part writing, I'd say. And then the fourth part would just be purely a harmonic or drone part, like filling out the chord with another part of the voice. So I would encourage, if you're into two-part writing, and any kind of writing, honestly, even if you want to be a pop writer, take Baroque counterpoint, studying Bach, Brahms, two-part inventions. That's huge. You'll learn a ton about how to write in a very restricted environment, a very studied environment, and it sounds really great. And then you can apply that over pop or rock or jazz writing or classical writing in a way that's a lot looser today. Now there's a lot less rules. You can, especially in jazz, you can really have parallel fifths and break a lot of the rules that we consider to be rules in Baroque counterpoint. Let's see, any other questions? Oh, right, invention, yeah. So yeah, I would say that would be what I'd recommend for that. Let's see. Any other questions? We can expand here a little bit. Okay. If you can think of something to ask, I'm happy to talk about it. If not, I could talk a little bit about writing with note cells. So another way to come up with good melodies and even chords is to restrict yourself to even less than the major scale. You can find a lot of really great material like this. So for instance, I mentioned triads before. If I take a C major triad and use that as a note restriction. Obviously, it might be a little boring. But even a melody like that, let's say that's my triadic melody. If I put it over A flat, it could sound pretty interesting, right? A flat major, 7 sharp 5. Or if I put that over, say, D minor. It can sound pretty nice. I could put it over B, like B, G triad with a B in the bass. Maybe B sus would be better. Let's try A minor. Not too bad. What else? How about E flat? So B flat 7. So again, the idea being restricting the number of notes you're using to write your melody. In this case, I'm just using the 3 notes of a major triad. You could use 4 notes. So if I took that major triad, and let's say I add another note, like the F sharp. So now I have the C major triad with an added F sharp. And then I could write a melody using those notes. So let's say something like that. Say I put that over A minor. Right? Or over C major. I could put it over D sus. Right? So you can try all the different roots and find one you like. That's cool. C diminished, C sharp diminished. So again, you're just taking your melody that you came up with using a restricted environment, in this case triad with added sharp 11, or added F sharp, C triad with added F sharp, and then finding a melody with that group of 4 notes, and then finding a cool bass note that it sounds good on, over. And then you can use your deductive reasoning to figure out what chord that might be. And that's where, again, like I said before, theory comes in super handy for that. You can use your ears for most all the rest of this. What sounds good to you? You know, you're all adults now, or getting close to being adults, and you've heard a lot of music in your life. So you can say, oh, I like this sound. And I just have to find a good note to put it over. You know, trust your judgment and let it expand. A minor. So any other questions? Got one more here. Noah says, I tend to get caught in writing slow compositions because my piano technique is pretty bad. Join the club. How do you approach faster and more upbeat ideas? You mentioned singing, so would it be would that be a sufficient substitute to flesh ideas out? That's a great question. Yeah, so I use Finale. You know, Finale, Sibelius, MuseScore, some sort of app that will play your composition as fast as it needs to be played. You know, when I'm writing, especially for big band, you're writing, 15 parts or 14 parts. It's really hard to envision that at a fast tempo. You know, even if I was a great piano player, you're not going to be able to play all the parts. So Finale is a great tool for that, or Sibelius. I would recommend, getting a student version, or MuseScore, I think is free at first, Noteflight. Anything that will play the music for you. GarageBand's great for that to start out. And then when you get to where you're going to do this seriously, you got to get some kind of either Finale or Sibelius. Those are industry standards. And I recommend it if you really want to compose as a major part of your life. You want something like that. So that's how I do it. I plug it into Finale, and then I can listen to it at any speed. You can play it at faster than human speed or super slow to really check all the details of all the notes and make sure everything's perfect. And so that's one thing. Yeah. And again, like you said, using singing, is that a sufficient substitute? It's a great substitute and it will help. You can, at a certain point, you won't be able to sing pitches very well, but you'll be able to sing rhythm pretty fast. So as you got to go slow to sing pitches in tune. And so you might start singing more rhythmically when you get fast, but you can still kind of envision how it's going to sound rhythmically and envision kind of the energy of it. So that's a great question. And that's my answer to that, is definitely having some kind of software that helps you. And then, of course, having a band is the best thing. So you bring the piece when it's good enough to bring to a band, you bring it to a band and you play it and you record it on your phone. And then when you get home, you listen to it and you edit it from the recording. You're like, I don't like this part. I'm going to rewrite this part. The band can also do it in different grooves. They can put it to a funk beat. They can put it to a swing groove. They can put it to a bossa nova. They can do all these different things that make the music sound different. And you might find the perfect feel for the song with a band. It's going to be easier than even Sibelius or Finale to do that. So I would recommend that if you can get something to play it back with. Any other questions? Let's see. How could you go about writing a tune with a simple idea in mind, like playing the 2 over a minor chord or something like that? Okay. Right. Okay, so here's our C minor, okay? And here's the 2. Really beautiful note, the 9 or the 2. It's a really great note. So my first answer would be like, and you could embellish the melody. So embellishing just means like the D, the 9 will be your main melody note, but you might go up and down to get to it, like, right? Or, so that's called embellishment. So you're really just thinking about the 2 or the 9 on C minor, but you're moving around in order to embellish it a little bit. You can even go, so I'm leaping up from G to the 3rd, to the 9, to the 1, and to the 9. Or, just... So that would be like doing the 9 on C minor with an embellishment. And then the 9, I could do the 9 on A flat minor. And then the 9 on F minor. And then the 9 on C sharp major. And so that concept right there would be me just playing the 9s, but embellishing each of them. And so I'm just going C minor 9, A flat minor 9, F minor 9, to C sharp major. So that would be like, in a sense, I'm just thinking of the 2 on each of the chords, but I'm still moving the chords around. I've come up with 4 chords, but I've used the 2 on each of the chords as the primary melody, and then I maybe just introduced a little bit of embellishment. In this case, upper and lower neighbor tones, right, which are common compositional embellishments, upper and lower neighbor tones. Let's see, and trying to start with that rather than changes or a melody. Yeah, okay, so another thing would be like if you just took that 9 and created rhythm with it. So, it's like a Charleston rhythm, they call it. So, that could be a really great intro to a song where you're just playing the 9, C minor 9, and that 2 or the 9 is just the melody note. That could be another use of just that one note, just a one note melody. I tend to think of melody as, 2 or more notes generally. So I would like, or, just leaping up from the 5th. So the idea being, in that case, just playing, again, the 9, but leaping from the 5th to the 9 on minor chords descending by whole steps. What is your approach on capturing emotions? This is good. I have a difficult time capturing angry or gross emotions, but I'd like to have that color in the same, in some of my pieces to resolve them to make a big impact, right? How do you find the nastiest thing you can think of? That's great. Okay, that's a great question. So, exploring harmony will help. So, really studying your theory, transcribing, listening to a ton of music, and when you find things that you think really reflect, so it's an abstract art, right? Music, sound, and emotion. So you have to figure out for you personally, what is anger, or what sounds angry to you. And when you find those examples, you need to learn why you feel like it sounds like it's angry. And it might be the volume. It might be how the drums are playing. It may not have to do with the composition, but how the composition is being played. Or it may have to do with how dense the chord is. If it's a really dark, a really intense chord, like a dominant, this is like a dominant 13, flat 9, sharp 11. That might have a certain level of like angst or tension, or, for you, it might feel like anger or, insecurity, or some kind of like tension, emotional tension. And so you find those things and start to make a connection for yourself. When you think of beauty, when you think of happiness, what sorts of sounds does that elicit, or what do you connect with those sounds? And then when you think of things that are angry or gross or, ugly, what are those sounds? And then, you start to develop a harmonic palette of things that you think will be an example of that. That particular chord I was just playing, for instance, if I'm doing that and then I resolve it to B flat major, it could sound nice. Like you said, it could have a big impact in terms of the resolution. But the big impact is going to have a lot more to do with how the band plays it, believe it or not. Because like a band can play a pretty simple dominant to 1 resolution, but they can play it with a ton of energy and conviction and a ton of like emotion. And so it can sound really impactful just by the way the musicians play it. So both of those come into play: the actual notes and the structure, creating an emotion, and then the way it's played. So the first part of your question, how do you approach, what is your approach for capturing emotions? That's it, is like having a really refined understanding of your emotions, like being aware of them and being aware of how the music connects with you. So when you're, having a nuanced understanding of minor, and like that's a minor major 7 chord with a 9 and a 13. But that sounds a lot different than if I'm just going E flat minor 7. It has a certain sound, but when I put those other colors, it has a lot more of a sophisticated emotional sound to it. And you start to get, when you get a deeper understanding of what you're hearing and how it looks on the piano, or how it sounds on the piano, you'll start to be able to flesh out emotions much more carefully. And certain things just won't match your emotion in the moment when you're writing. You're in a certain mood, you're trying to get that mood down in a song, and certain chords you'll be like, that's not it. For instance, this sound, when you think of G, instead of G major, you put the major 7, it has a certain sound. But then if I take the 3rd out and add the 9, that has an even different sound. And so all these subtle ways of playing G major, if I had the sharp 11, suddenly it starts to get more human sounding. The emotions become way more sophisticated. So, again, theory, developing your ears, and then transcribing those things that elicit the emotions or remind you of the emotions you're trying to learn to write from. Hope that helps. Any other questions? Just to, if you come up with something, feel free to add it in here. I'll just talk a little bit more about this emotion idea. One thing to think about is also, you can tell the players how you want them to play. So Brad Cox is a great composer in town. A lot of his compositions for his big band will say things like, crazy freak out. It'll be written on the part, crazy freak out, and the whole band does a crazy freak out. Or it says, you know, sorrowful lyrical melodies, you know. And so that's what he's telling you to do. And there's nothing written except that. So he's trusting that you as a player will be able to play some mournful melodies within the key of like E minor or something. So he might give you a chord and a feeling, and he wants you to interpret that. So you could also do that. You could say, hey, I want this to be like completely nasty, you know, angry section of the tune, and you solo here with that in mind. Of course, that's going to elicit a huge response from most players. They're going to be like, okay, I'm just going to go nuts on this, you know. And so you see that a lot from composers. Say, we got another question here. Which group of notes do you feel works best over a major sharp 4 or sharp 11 chord? That's a great, really wonderful question. So again, let's use C as an example. So C major 7 with a sharp 11. I love a lot of the notes. The 9 is great. The major 7 is great. There's a 13 or 6. So the sharp 11. Even the 3rd sounds great. There's the 5th. The 9 again. Sharp 11, 6, 5, 9, major 7. So one answer is they all do sound good in the context of a melody. You know, I would say definitely explore using the upper structure triad, the 9, sharp 11, and 13, which is it creates a D major triad. Other fun notes on a major 7 would be like the sharp 9. So like a B triad over C major. And that was like a B sus over C major. Sus add 3. So yeah, the sharp 11's great, the 9's great, 13. Sharp 9's really fun. You can use sharp 5. That can be pretty crunchy sounding. So those are, you know, those are the sounds I like. If it's C major, you know, exploring E harmonic minor against C major. That's a really pretty sound. All right, I guess we're going to change our breakout room in a minute. So if there's any last minute questions, we've got a few seconds here. Anyway, it's good to get to share some of this stuff with you. Marcus will have my email, so you feel free to email me if you have questions, or if you have a song you're working on, email me. I can give you some comments on it. I usually have enough time to try to help people out free of charge if they want my feedback. So feel free to reach out. All right, I'll see you in the next room.
So I think I'll just leave it at that. I'm looking forward to the next hour.
Hi, John.
Brandon Draper.
What's up, dude?
Hello.
Look at all these old people.
All right, so guys, take 5 minutes if you need to, and then we're going to get started with John Kerzilamut's masterclass here in just 5 minutes. So
Sweet.
thanks to Brandon and Matt.
So I'm good for today, Marcus.
Yeah, man.
Cool. All right, I'll email you that video.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. See you guys.
See ya.
Bye.